Dr. Sarah Chen stared through the observation dome of Nexus Station, watching the massive merchant vessels dock with all the grace of dancing whales. Their crystalline hulls caught the light of the binary stars, sending prismatic reflections across the station's curved walls. After 3 years as the only human xenobiologist on this alien trading hub, she still found the sight breathtaking. Her admiration was interrupted by an urgent ping from her neural translator. "Dr. Chen, your presence is requested immediately aboard the Luminous Venture." The message came from First Merchant Ixel, the most prominent trader in this sector of space. Sarah had never dealt with the notoriously proud crystalline merchants before, and she wasn't eager to start. "Basis for consultation," she vocalized back. "Unexplained system malfunctions. Our finest engineers are perplexed." Sarah frowned. "I specialize in xenobiology, not engineering. Surely your guild has more qualified." "We have exhausted conventional expertise," Ixel interrupted. "Your species has a reputation for unconventional perspectives." That was diplomatic phrasing for how most advanced species viewed humans. Primitive creatures who somehow stumbled into faster-than-light travel while still relying on biological neural networks. But that primitive perspective had proven surprisingly valuable in solving problems that stumped more advanced civilizations. "Very well," Sarah agreed, already gathering her diagnostic kit. "I'll be there in 20 minutes." The Luminous Venture was the flagship of the crystalline merchant fleet, its hull composed of living crystal that responded to thought commands from its crew. As Sarah approached in a shuttle pod, she could see subtle imperfections in its usually flawless surface, like acne on the face of a supermodel. First Merchant Ixel met her at the airlock, their crystalline form refracting light in complex patterns that Sarah's translator interpreted as anxiety. "Thank you for coming, Dr. Chen. The situation has grown more serious." "Tell me everything," Sarah said, following Ixel through corridors that would have been dazzling if not for the obvious signs of distress in the living crystal walls. "It began 3 standard cycles ago. Minor system fluctuations at first, environmental controls shifting unexpectedly, gravity plating activating in unusual patterns. We assumed it was simply the crystal matrix adapting to new trade routes. But then, Ixel's form clouded with distress. The ship began rejecting crew commands, cargo bay doors opening and closing without authorization, navigation systems plotting courses we didn't request." Sarah ran her hand along one wall, feeling unusual vibrations. "Have you considered the possibility that your ship might be responding to external stimuli?" "Impossible," Ixel dismissed. "Our crystalline technology is impervious to outside interference. We've swept for every known form of radiation, electromagnetic disturbance, or quantum fluctuation." "Known forms," Sarah emphasized. "But in my experience, life has a way of surprising us. May I see your sensor logs?" Ixel led her to the bridge, where a dozen crystalline officers worked at stations that seemed to grow out of the floor. One wall displayed a holographic readout of the ship's sensor data. Sarah began scrolling through it, her eyes narrowing as patterns emerged. "These disturbances, they're not random," she muttered, mostly to herself. "There's a rhythm to them, almost like—" She stopped, a crazy idea forming. "Like what?" Ixel pressed. Sarah chose her words carefully. "On Earth, we have creatures called whales that communicate through complex songs that can travel for thousands of miles through water. These patterns, they remind me of those songs, but transmitted through the crystalline structure of your ship itself." The bridge crew's crystalline forms clouded with what her translator identified as a mixture of disbelief and amusement. "You suggest our advanced vessel is being affected by singing." Ixel's tone made it clear how primitive they found the concept. "I suggest," Sarah said firmly, "that we might be dealing with a life form that communicates in ways your sensors aren't designed to detect. Something that resonates with crystalline structures the way whale songs resonate through water." Before Ixel could dismiss her theory, every crystal surface on the bridge began to pulse with soft light in a distinct pattern. The crew frantically worked their stations as Sarah watched, transfixed. She'd seen this before, not the light show itself, but the reaction it provoked in her. "The same feeling I get watching humpbacks breach," she whispered. "That sense of witnessing something vast and intelligent, expressing itself in ways we barely understand." For the first time, uncertainty crept into Ixel's voice. "What exactly are you suggesting, Dr. Chen?" Sarah squared her shoulders, knowing her next words would either end her career or mark the beginning of something extraordinary. "I'm suggesting that your ship isn't malfunctioning. It's receiving messages, and I think it's time we learned how to write back." "Your hypothesis is absurd," Senior Engineer Vex announced, their crystalline form pulsing with skeptical purple hues. "The void between stars cannot support life." Sarah kept her eyes on her datapad, mapping the timing of the ship's malfunctions over the past 3 cycles. Just like Earth's oceans were once thought too hostile to support complex life, the universe has a way of proving our limitations wrong. She stood in the Luminous Venture's main engineering bay, surrounded by floating holographic displays showing the ship's systems. First Merchant Ixel had assembled a team of experts to evaluate her theory, though most seemed more interested in dismissing it than testing it. "Even if such a thing were possible," Vex continued, "our sensors would have detected." "Would they?" Sarah interrupted, looking up. "Your sensors are designed to detect what you expect to find. How many times has humanity discovered something simply because we didn't know it was impossible?" Before Vex could respond, the ship shuddered. The crystalline walls rippled with patterns of light that made Sarah think of bioluminescent squid in Earth's deep oceans. She activated her neural recorder, capturing every detail. "Another malfunction," Ixel noted, "though I admit the timing seems convenient to your argument." Sarah walked to the nearest wall, placing her hand against it. The living crystal felt different than before. Warmer, almost vibrating with energy. "These patterns are getting stronger and more organized. Look at this." She projected her data analysis into the center of the room. The first disturbances were sporadic, like something testing for a response, but they've evolved into complex repeating sequences, here and here. She highlighted 2 distinct patterns. They're not just random signals, they're variations on a theme, like a conversation trying different approaches when the first attempt isn't understood. One of the younger engineers, their form a softer shade of crystal, moved closer to examine the data. The resonance frequencies do show remarkable similarity to organic communication patterns. "Kira," Vex warned, but the young engineer continued. "We've always known our ships respond to consciousness. It's how we control them. Is it so impossible that another consciousness might learn to interact with them?" Sarah gave Kira a grateful nod. "Exactly. And look at where these interactions cluster." She switched the display to a star chart showing the Luminous Venture's recent trade routes. "They're strongest along this particular path, like something following a migration route." "Preposterous," Vex began, but Ixel raised a crystalline appendage for silence. "You believe we have unknowingly entered the territory of a space-dwelling species?" the first merchant asked. "One that communicates through crystalline resonance," Sarah confirmed. "Your ships might be the first things they've encountered that can hear them. And now they're trying to talk." The engineering bay erupted in overlapping arguments, but Sarah's attention was drawn to a new pattern emerging on the walls. Unlike the previous signals, this one seemed to respond directly to the increased activity in the room. The lights pulsed in sync with the raised voices, then shifted to a calmer rhythm when the argument died down. "It's watching us," she breathed. "Learning from us." Ixel moved closer to the wall, their crystalline form shifting to transmit frequencies Sarah couldn't perceive. The wall's pattern changed again, mimicking Ixel's resonance before adding its own variations. "Remarkable," Kira whispered. "If you're right," Ixel said slowly, "we need to understand what they're trying to tell us. These disruptions have spread to other ships along our trade routes. The Merchant Guild is demanding action." Sarah felt a chill. "What kind of action?" There is talk of deploying resonance dampeners throughout the affected sectors. If these are truly living creatures, it would be like deafening an entire ecosystem. Sarah finished. We need to establish communication before that happens. Prove they're intelligent beings with a right to their territory. And how do you propose to do that? Vex demanded. Even if these patterns indicate consciousness, translating them into meaningful communication. The ship suddenly lurched, more violently than before. Warning signals flashed across the holographic displays as the crystal walls began resonating at frequencies that made Sarah's teeth ache. Multiple systems failing, Kira reported. The crystal matrix is being overwhelmed by external frequencies. Shut it down, Vex ordered. Full dampening field. Wait, Sarah called out. Look at the pattern. The chaotic lights had resolved into a distinct sequence, repeating with increasing urgency. Sarah's mind raced, remembering patterns she'd studied in Earth's oceans. This isn't an attack. It's a warning. Warning of what? Ixal demanded. As if in answer, new alarms blared. Kira's crystalline form paled. Massive gravitational disturbance detected ahead. If we'd stayed on our plotted course. They were trying to prevent a collision, Sarah realized. They know these spaces better than we do. They've been trying to protect us. The engineering bay fell silent as the implications sank in. Even Vex seemed unable to argue with such direct evidence of intelligent intervention. Ixal turned to Sarah, their crystalline form now glowing with colors her translator associated with determination. It seems, Dr. Chen, that we owe both you and our unseen friends an apology. The question now becomes, how do we learn to talk back? Sarah sat cross-legged in her makeshift lab aboard the luminous venture, surrounded by holographic projections of communication patterns. 3 days had passed since the gravitational anomaly incident, and she'd barely slept, too engrossed in decoding the crystal songs that now filled the ship. Play it again, Kira, she requested, rubbing her tired eyes. The young crystalline engineer had become her strongest ally, fascinated by the possibility of discovering the new form of life. The recording filled the room, a complex symphony of resonances that made the ship's walls shimmer in response. Sarah had started thinking of them as hongs, though that was an oversimplification of what appeared to be a multi-dimensional form of communication. There's a mathematical precision to it, Kira observed, their crystalline form shifting through analytical patterns. But it doesn't match any known communication protocols. That's because we're thinking too linearly. Sarah stood, walking through the holographic patterns. On Earth, whale song isn't just about the sounds. It's about how those sounds travel through water, how they bounce off ocean features, how they layer and interact. These beings are doing something similar with gravitational fields and crystal resonance. The ship shuddered slightly, and new patterns appeared on the walls. They'd been increasing in frequency and complexity since Sarah began her research, as if their unseen observers were encouraged by the attention. Look at this, Sarah said, highlighting a recurring sequence. This pattern always appears when we're approaching certain regions of space, but it's not just a warning. It's a description. They're mapping gravitational currents the way whales map ocean currents. Fascinating, Kira agreed. But how do we respond? Our attempts to mimic their patterns haven't produced meaningful results, because we're trying to speak their language without understanding their context. Sarah pulled up a new display, showing the local stellar geography. We need to think bigger. These beings likely perceive space itself differently than we do. They're not just communicating through the crystal, they're using it to share their view of reality. A soft chime announced first Merchant Ixal's arrival. The Merchant Guild is growing impatient, Dr. Chen. 3 more ships have reported similar phenomena. If we cannot demonstrate significant progress. We're close, Sarah insisted. Look at these response patterns. When we attempt communication, they adjust their signals, trying to find frequencies we can understand. They're learning, adapting. We just need to show them we're doing the same. As if on cue, the ship's crystal matrix began humming with a new sequence, one that made both Kira and Ixel freeze in surprise. "That's impossible," Kira whispered. "What? What am I missing?" Sarah asked, her translator unable to detect whatever had shocked her colleagues. "They're mimicking our ship's neural interface frequencies," Ixel explained. "The private frequencies we use to control ship functions. They shouldn't be able to replicate those." Sarah felt a surge of excitement. "Don't you see? They're not just trying to talk to your ship, they're trying to talk to you directly. They've realized the crystal responds to consciousness, and they're attempting to bridge the gap between their perception and yours." She quickly adjusted her instruments, analyzing the new patterns. "These frequencies, they're like nothing in our database, but they have similarities to both your neural interfaces and the gravitational mapping sequences. They're creating a hybrid language, a bridge between species," Kira marveled. "Exactly. But to use it, we need to meet them halfway." Sarah turned to Ixel. "I need direct access to the ship's neural interface systems, and I need volunteers willing to attempt direct communication." Ixel's form clouded with concern. "What you're suggesting is extremely dangerous. Our neural interfaces are delicate. Exposure to unknown frequencies could open up an entirely new form of communication." Sarah finished. "Your species learned to merge consciousness with crystal. These beings have learned to speak through it. Together, we might create something unprecedented." The ship trembled again, but this time the pattern was different, gentler, almost encouraging. The walls pulsed with colors that Sarah's translator struggled to interpret, but somehow she understood the sentiment behind them. Anticipation, curiosity, hope. "I volunteer," Kira said suddenly. "My specialty is neural interface optimization. I'm best suited to handle any unexpected feedback." Ixel studied the ongoing light show, their crystalline form shifting through complex decision-making patterns. Finally, they said, "The Guild will not approve, which is why we will not tell them until we have results. You have 12 hours, Dr. Chen. Make them count." Sarah nodded, already pulling up neural interface schematics. "Have any of you ever heard of the Voyager Golden Record?" When they indicated no, she smiled. "Humans once launched messages into space, hoping to communicate with unknown intelligences. We included mathematics, music, whale songs, universal concepts. Now we're going to do something similar, but instead of a record, we're going to use your ship's crystal matrix as our message in a bottle." The lights pulsed faster, as if the observers understood they were about to try something new. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing the next 12 hours would either make history or end her career. "Let's teach them how to sing with us." Time slipped away as Sarah and Kira worked to modify the ship's neural interface. The crystal walls around them pulsed with increasing frequency, as if their unseen observers sensed the importance of what they were attempting. "Neural pathway conversion at 80%, Kira reported, their crystalline form glowing with concentration. "But these patterns, they're unlike anything our systems were designed to process." Sarah adjusted her makeshift translation matrix, combining whale song algorithms with crystalline resonance patterns. "That's because we're trying to translate between three fundamentally different ways of perceiving reality. Your crystalline consciousness, their space-dwelling awareness, and my human brain." "Speaking of human brains," Ixel interrupted, entering the lab, "are you certain yours can handle this level of neural feedback? Our interfaces were designed for crystalline thought patterns." Sarah checked her neural dampeners one last time. "No, I'm not certain. But someone needs to represent the biological perspective in this conversation." Besides, she managed a tired smile. "Humans have a long history of doing things we're not supposed to be capable of." The ship shuddered, stronger than ever before. The walls erupted in cascading patterns that made Sarah's translation algorithms spike off the charts. "They know we're trying to reach them," she said. "They're getting excited, or maybe anxious. Kira, are you ready?" The young engineer's form pulsed with determination. Neural interface modifications complete. "But Sarah, the level of consciousness melding you're proposing. It's never been attempted with a non-crystalline species. First time for everything, Sarah said, settling into the interface chair. Ixal, if this goes wrong, I will take full responsibility, the first merchant assured her. The guild is already demanding answers. Several ships have altered their trade routes to avoid the affected sectors, causing significant economic disruption. We need results. Sarah nodded, attaching the neural connectors to her temples. Start with a 10% consciousness link. Kira, monitor for any sign of neural rejection. And let's hope our friends out there understand what we're trying to do. The first surge of connection made her gasp. It was like diving into an ocean of light, her thoughts scattering like startled fish. She felt Kira's crystalline consciousness brush against hers. Alien yet somehow familiar, a shimmer of ordered thought patterns that helped anchor her in the stream of sensation. Neural patterns holding steady, she heard Kira say, the words seeming to come from very far away. Increasing link to 20%. The second wave hit harder. Sarah's consciousness expanded through the ship's crystal matrix, feeling every vibration, every resonance. And there, at the edges of perception, something vast and strange and wonderful. They're here, she whispered, her voice shaking with awe. So many of them. Waiting. Watching. Consciousness link at 30%, Kira reported. Sarah, your neural patterns are becoming erratic. No, I need to go deeper. They're trying to reach back, but they can't quite. They need 40%. The world dissolved into pure sensation. Sarah felt herself spreading out into space, riding gravitational currents she'd never known existed. She felt the presence of the space-dwelling beings more clearly now. Vast consciousness that flowed through the void like whales through the deep, speaking in songs of gravity and light. They're not just individuals, she gasped. They're a community, a culture. They've been watching us, trying to understand. 50%. Sarah, your neural activity is approaching dangerous levels. But Sarah barely heard the warning. She was too caught up in the symphony of space itself, experiencing reality as these magnificent beings did. Every gravitational eddy was a current to ride. Every crystal resonance a note in an endless song. And now, finally, she understood what they'd been trying to tell them. They're not just warning us away from gravitational anomalies, she managed to say, though speaking required incredible effort. They're trying to show us the safe paths, the space lanes that flow between stars. They want to help. Neural feedback loop forming. Kira's alarmed voice cut through her revelation. We need to disconnect. Wait. Sarah pushed through the chaos in her mind, focusing all her will on one desperate attempt at communication. She thought of Earth's oceans, of whale songs echoing through the deep, of humanity's long journey to the stars. She projected images of cooperation, of species learning from each other, of knowledge freely shared. The response nearly overwhelmed her. The being's consciousness surged through the crystal matrix, not in words or pictures, but in pure concepts. Recognition, agreement, joy at finally being understood. Sarah felt tears running down her face as the vast intelligence touched her mind, sharing glimpses of a perspective so alien yet so beautiful it defied description. Recording everything, she managed to say before darkness claimed her. When she awoke, Ixal and Kira were hovering over her, their crystalline forms radiating concern. Did it work? She asked weakly. See for yourself, Ixal said, gesturing to the walls. All around them, the crystal matrix pulsed with new patterns, not the chaotic signals of before, but organized, deliberate sequences. And on every display screen, data streamed in, maps of gravitational currents, safe passage routes, warnings of spatial anomalies. They understood, Sarah whispered, and they're still talking to us. Kira's form sparkled with excitement, not just talking, teaching. These navigation charts, they're more detailed than anything we've ever compiled. They're showing us how to travel their currents. "The guild will have to listen now," Ixel said. "You've done it, Dr. Chen. You've proven they're not just intelligent. They're willing to help us." Sarah smiled, exhausted but triumphant. "No, we've done it. Human intuition, crystalline technology, and space-dwelling wisdom. Together we made something entirely new." The walls hummed with gentle patterns that her tired mind somehow understood as approval. Somewhere out in the void, their new allies were swimming through streams of gravity, singing songs of connection that bridged the gap between stars and species. The Merchant Guild chamber was silent as Sarah finished her presentation. 2 weeks had passed since the first successful contact, and she stood before the Guild's High Council, her neural translator struggling to keep up with the cascade of crystalline reactions around her. "Impossible," one council member finally said, their form clouded with disbelief. "The void between stars cannot support life." Sarah interrupted gently. "Just as your ancestors once believed crystal couldn't support consciousness." She gestured to the holographic display, showing the intricate dance of space-dwelling beings moving through gravitational currents. "They'd been here all along. We just needed to learn how to see them." First Merchant Ixel moved to stand beside her, their crystalline form radiating support. "The navigation data they've provided has already prevented 3 potential disasters. Their knowledge of spatial phenomena far exceeds our own." "And you trust this information?" another council member asked. "Provided by creatures we cannot even see." Sarah took a deep breath. "I can show you." She nodded to Kira, who activated the modified neural interface they'd spent the past 2 weeks perfecting. The chamber's crystal walls came alive with patterns, but not the chaotic pulses of before. Now they flowed in harmonious sequences, telling stories in light and resonance. The council members' forms shifted in amazement as their neural interfaces translated the patterns into understanding. "They call themselves the current singers," Sarah explained. "They experience space as we experience atmosphere, a medium to move through, full of currents and eddies we've never noticed. What we saw as random interference was their equivalent of lighthouse beacons, warning ships away from dangerous gravitational shoals." "The trade route disruptions," one council member began. "Were them trying to protect us?" Ixel finished. "Our ships were unknowingly entering spawning grounds, disrupting migration patterns. But instead of responding with hostility, they sought to communicate, to teach." Sarah pulled up the new star charts they'd compiled. "They're offering to help us map safe passages through space, routes that work with natural phenomena instead of fighting against them. Our ships could reduce power consumption by 40% by following their currents." The chamber erupted in excited discussion, crystalline forms shimmering with possibilities. Sarah watched with satisfaction as the council members explored the data, their initial skepticism giving way to wonder. "And they ask for nothing in return?" one asked suspiciously. "They ask for recognition," Sarah corrected. "Acknowledgement of their right to exist in their chosen territories." And she smiled. "They're curious about us. About all of us. They want to learn, to exchange knowledge. They see potential in our differences." As if in response, new patterns rippled across the walls, complex symphonies of light and resonance that made the council members pause in awe. Sarah had come to recognize this particular sequence. It was their way of expressing hope. "We stand at a crossroads," she continued. "We can deploy those resonance dampeners, silence their songs, and continue blindly pushing our ships through space. Or we can learn from them, grow with them, and discover wonders we never imagined possible." Kira stepped forward, their form glowing with enthusiasm. "We've already begun developing new interfaces, combining human neural plasticity with our crystalline technology. The current singers are teaching us to see space itself in new ways. More than that," Ixel added, "they're offering us a chance to prove we can grow beyond our assumptions, to show that different forms of life can find common ground." The council chamber was quiet again, but this time with thoughtful consideration rather than disbelief. Sarah waited, remembering all the times in human history when fear of the unknown had won out over curiosity and cooperation. Finally, the head of council spoke. First Merchant Ixel, you vouch for these beings' intelligence and peaceful intentions. I do. Ixel's form pulsed with certainty. I have touched minds with them through our adapted interface. They are wise, curious, and eager to share their knowledge. And you, Dr. Chen. The council head turned to Sarah. You who first recognized their attempts at communication, what do you recommend? Sarah thought of her first glimpse of their vast consciousness, of the beauty they had shown her. I recommend we listen, she said simply. Humanity learned long ago that intelligence comes in many forms. We grew by learning to communicate with minds different from our own, from primates to dolphins to artificial consciousness. Now we have a chance to help forge understanding between crystalline and space-dwelling awareness. All we need is the courage to try. New patterns danced across the walls, more complex than ever before. The council members watched, their forms shifting through colors of wonder and decision. The Resonance Dampener project is suspended, the council had announced. Instead, we will establish a joint research initiative to explore communication and cooperation with the current singers. Dr. Chen, we request that you lead this effort, with Engineer Kira and First Merchant Ixel as your primary liaisons. Sarah felt tears of relief and joy threatening to fall. Above her, the crystal ceiling rippled with patterns she now recognized as celebration. The current singers had been watching, waiting, hoping. Thank you, she said, both to the council and to the unseen beings whose songs had started this journey. I promise you won't regret this decision. As she left the chamber later, Sarah paused to watch ships docking at the station. But now she saw them differently. Not just vessels pushing through void, but participants in a greater dance, moving through currents of gravity and light. Somewhere out there, the current singers were swooning through their star streams, their songs touching crystalline hulls with messages of guidance and welcome. Humanity had helped bridge the gap between silicon and space, between solid and void, between what was known and what was possible. And in doing so, they had once again proved that their greatest strength lay not in technology or physical power, but in their ability to recognize intelligence in all its forms and find ways to reach across the boundaries between minds. The void between stars, it turned out, had never been empty at all. It had only been waiting for someone to learn its songs.